Imagine standing on a mountain that suddenly rips in half beneath your feet. The earth groans, the sky turns a strange twilight that isn't quite day or night, and history as you know it is coming to a violent, beautiful crash. It sounds like the climax of a high-budget sci-fi movie, doesn't it?
It does. It has all the elements of a blockbuster: cosmic shifts, war, betrayal. But what we're talking about today isn't Hollywood. It's the ancient, visceral, and frankly mind-bending conclusion to the book of Zechariah. We are looking at chapters 10 through 14 today.
And getting into this text, I realized something. We usually think of ancient prophecies as dusty and distant, but reading this, it feels urgent. It feels like a chaotic news cycle.
That's the perfect way to describe it. Zechariah is wrapping up his visions, and he moves from the local politics of his time into what scholars call the eschaton, the end of days. But before we get to the splitting mountains, we have to talk about leadership. That seems to be the trigger for everything in chapter 10 and 11.
Right, the text opens with this contrast. On one hand, you have a promise of reign and restoration, but then immediately there's this scathing attack on shepherds.
Exactly. In the ancient Near East, shepherd was code for king or ruler. Zechariah is calling out the leaders who have been feeding the people lies, literally, diviners seeing lies. And because the leadership is corrupt, the people are described as wandering like sheep without a shepherd. They are vulnerable.
So God steps in?
He does. And the language shifts to war. God says he will make the house of Judah like his majestic horse in battle. It's a complete reversal. The sheep become war horses. But then we hit chapter 11, which I think is one of the most tragic and specific chapters in the entire Old Testament.
This is the section about the two staffs, right? Favor and union.
Yes. God essentially acts out a parable through the prophet. He takes two staffs to shepherd the flock. One represents God's favor, his grace, and the other represents the unity of the people. But the people, they reject this good shepherd. They detest him.
It's a breakup.
A nasty one. The shepherd breaks the staff called favor, symbolizing the end of a covenant of protection. But the part that always gives me chills is the transaction. The shepherd asks for his wages. He says, "If you think it best, give me my pay."
And they give him 30 pieces of silver.
30 pieces of silver.
I think everyone listening just had the same light bulb turn on. That number is incredibly specific. It's impossible not to think of the New Testament, of Judas betraying Jesus.
It is impossible to ignore. In Zechariah's time, 30 pieces of silver was the price of a slave. It was an insult. They were saying, your leadership, your care, your prophecy, it's worth the price of a common slave to us. And God's response is furious. He tells Zechariah to throw it to the potter, into the house of the Lord.
It's haunting how accurate that visual becomes centuries later. So because they reject the good shepherd, they get what? A bad one?
Worse, they get a worthless shepherd. The text says this leader won't heal the broken or feed the healthy. He will eat the meat of the choice sheep. It's a terrifying picture of tyranny. When you reject true authority, you don't get freedom. You get exploitation.
That's a sobering thought for any era, honestly. But the tone shifts again in chapter 12. We move from this rejection to a siege. Jerusalem becomes the center of the world's attention, but not in a good way.
No, it becomes a cup of reeling and a heavy stone. The nations gather against it. But this is where the narrative arc bends toward redemption. God defends the city, but something strange happens spiritually. It says God will pour out a spirit of grace and supplication.
And then we get that verse, "They will look on me whom they have pierced."
That is the emotional core of the finale. The Hebrew there is startling. God is speaking, identifying himself as the one being pierced. It implies that the rejection we saw with the 30 pieces of silver culminates in this physical wounding. And the reaction of the people isn't fear. It's mourning. Deep, gut-wrenching grief. Like losing a firstborn child.
It sounds like a moment of realization. Like when you realize you've hurt the only person who was actually trying to help you.
Precisely. It's the grief of repentance. And immediately following that grief, in chapter 13, a fountain is opened for sin and impurity. You see the logic? Rejection leads to piercing, piercing leads to mourning, and mourning leads to cleansing.
But the cleansing process described here, it's not gentle. Chapter 13 talks about striking the shepherd and scattering the sheep, and then refining the survivors through fire.
It's the refiner's fire. The text says 2/3 are cut off, and the remaining third is brought through the fire to be refined like silver and gold. It's a brutal image, but the outcome is intimacy. God says, "They are my people," and they say, "The Lord is my God." The fire burns away the worthless shepherd and the idols, leaving only the relationship.
Which brings us to the grand finale. Chapter 14, the day of the Lord.
The day of the Lord. This is where the special effects budget goes through the roof. All nations gather to fight Jerusalem. The city is being ransacked. It looks like total defeat. And then the Lord's feet touch the Mount of Olives,
And the mountain splits, east to west.
creating a massive valley for escape. It's reminiscent of the Red Sea parting, but this is geological. It's earth-shattering. And then the natural laws begin to break down. The text says there will be no cold or frost, and at evening time there will be light.
At evening time there will be light. That is such a poetic phrase. It signifies that the dark night of history is finally being pushed back.
And living waters start flowing out of Jerusalem, half to the Dead Sea, half to the Mediterranean. It's an ecosystem of life flowing from God's presence. But what I love most about chapter 14 isn't just the cosmic battle. It's the ending. It's the result of the victory.
You mean the bells?
The bells on the horses.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because after all this war and splitting mountains and plagues that dissolve flesh, which is terrifying by the way, it ends with a description of cooking pots and horse bells.
It's the most profound point Zechariah makes. He says that on that day, the bells on the horses will be inscribed with "Holy to the Lord." Now remember, the high priest wore a turban with a gold plate that said "Holy to the Lord." It was the most sacred object in the religion.
So Zechariah is taking the holiest label in existence and putting it on a beast of burden?
Exactly. And he goes further. He says the cooking pots in every house in Jerusalem will be just as holy as the sacred bowls used at the altar,
So the distinction between the sacred and the secular is gone.
completely erased. In this final kingdom, you don't have a temple where God lives and a city where people live. Everything is the temple. Driving your car, making dinner, doing your job, it all bears the weight of glory. The presence of God has saturated the mundane.
That is a beautiful, if overwhelming concept. But I have to ask, there's a warning in there too. The nations that don't come up to worship don't get rain.
Right. It's a reminder that this new reality is a kingdom, not a democracy. The source of life, the living waters, and the rain is connected to the king. If you disconnect from the source, you dry up. It's not necessarily a lightning bolt of punishment. It's the natural consequence of refusing the source of life.
So looking back at these 5 chapters, we've gone from a rejected shepherd sold for the price of a slave, to a pierced figure, to a warrior king splitting mountains, to a world where even the cooking pots are holy. What is the takeaway for us?
I think the takeaway is about recognition. The people in these chapters missed the shepherd when he came in humility. They only recognized him when he came in fire. The text invites us to recognize the shepherd now, before the mountain splits. To look on the one who was pierced and find that fountain for cleansing, rather than waiting for the day when the choice is taken away.
It's a story of ultimate convergence. History, pain, and redemption all colliding at one point.
And the result is a world where everything matters, where nothing is trivial anymore because God is all in all.
A world where there is no more night. That's a place I think we all want to be.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of heavy ground today. Zechariah isn't an easy read, but it's certainly a powerful one.
It's the roadmap from the tragedy of betrayal to the triumph of holiness.
Well said. Thank you for walking us through the apocalypse today. And to everyone listening, maybe look at your own cooking pots and daily grind a little differently. If this text is right, it's all heading towards something sacred. Thanks for listening.
If you have been blessed by this, please like, subscribe, and share this joy with others. God bless.